Hey everyone, Bradley Stalder here. Tonight on the Best Belt Fantasy Football live stream and podcast, I'm going to be talking through some of the biggest Week 15 waiver wire pickups and must-add players so that you can succeed in your fantasy championships. Good luck, everyone. Let's get down to it.
Hey. Really the only thing that gon' be normal is distribution. Normal folks gon' infuse some. Optimize your lineups and you feed the rest, you mute them. Turning it up, these numbers are loud. Peeping this game from a nimbus is wild. Making it rain. While I embrace all this risk, I'm insane. Talking about that best bill, I'm the best rest till into the next world. Guess I got next still. Best bill, I'm the best rest till into the next world.
And here we are. We've made it to the fantasy football playoffs. It's been a grind. Congratulations to all of you who have earned a bye for this week, but some of you haven't. Or maybe some of you need to still pick up some waiver claims. So let's get into some of the big players, and maybe they're not available in your league, but it's always worth checking because whether it's bye weeks, whether it's injuries, or players that have been forgotten or left for dead, no, these are players that you need to make sure are not left on your waiver wire. And depending upon the size of your league, you need to put in some pretty aggressive bids, even though they are sleepers, if you want to put it that way. You want to get in on these players, and hopefully it's not too late for our first player. The first must add for the week, Elijah Moore, wide receiver for the New York Jets. And we've seen an up and down season from Elijah Moore. The first 4 weeks, all at least 87% of the snaps. He had 7, 5, 10, and 4 targets to start the year. But then it started going downhill, 73, 66, 17% of snaps. And finally, he's worked his way back up to over 80% of snaps week 14 against Buffalo. Yes, Corey Davis left this game, but Elijah Moore still commanded 10 targets. He got a red zone target, 104 air yards. That's the second highest of the season for Elijah Moore. He had the 6 receptions for 60 yards. He finishes the wide receiver 33 in full PPR. But here, this next week, the New York Jets get the Detroit Lions, and it is an absolutely smash matchup. I don't care who the starting quarterback is for the Jets. I mean, I hope that it's Mike White, but even if it's Joe Flacco, that's not going to be a downgrade for Elijah Moore for his fantasy value. So you need to be going to get Elijah Moore. He is primed for a huge breakout. And when I talk about like positive matchups, for the New York Jets, like Garrett Wilson, of course, pops in there. But Elijah Moore, there's no reason he should be outside of your top 36 of wide receivers. The consensus for fantasy pros right now is wide receiver 43. There is no way Elijah Moore finishes that way. The Detroit Lions give up the third most fantasy points to the wide receiver position on the year. So you need to be going to get Elijah Moore. It's not just going to be Garrett Wilson. We're monitoring the Corey Davis injury, but still, Elijah Moore has worked his way back into the starting lineup. He's working out of the slot. And as we've seen the last 2 games, 16 total targets, 4 total red zone targets, and 162 air yards over the last 2 games. Fire up your Elijah Moores as a flex consideration, and he should not be on your waiver wire. You need to make sure you're picking up Chig Okonkwo off your waiver wire as well. The 4th round pick in this year's draft has played really well as of late. I mean, he finally, has gotten back-to-back games of 50% snaps or better. But over the last 2 games, he's run the most routes of the year. He's had 5 targets in each of the last 3 games. And he's had at least 30 receiving yards each of the last 6 games. Finally gets in the end zone. He had 2 red zone targets in this game. And he finishes as the tight end 3 in full PPR, even though he played 51% of snaps. So we may be getting Treylon Burks back, but I think that Chig Okonkwo has earned his way into a starting rotation role. Austin Hooper was still very much used in this game. Hooper finished as a top 10 tight end. So Chig Okonkwo is, I think, the preferred tight end option over Austin Hooper, and he needs to be off your waiver wire, especially if you're in dire straits for tight ends. I mean, there are some really tough tight end matchups this week. If we look at, Evan Ingram, if you were buoyed by Evan Ingram last week, he gets the Dallas Cowboys this week, who allow the fewest tight end points, and Ingram has a negative 22% advantage per PFF against his linebacker partner. Same with Foster Moreau. Moreau has a tough matchup against New England. Noah Fant has a tough matchup. Cole Kmet has a tough matchup. Okay. And obviously, you're starting your Dalton Schultz, your Gerald Everett's, your Greg Dulcich's over Chig Okonkwo, but you don't have a lot of confidence in Tyler Higbee over Okonkwo. I think he gets into that low end tight end, low end tight end 1, high end tight end 2, pretty regular consideration. There we go. All right, we got a few comments in the chat. Let's talk about it. First is Millie C. My wide receivers are Lamb, Cooper, DPJ, and Alec Pierce. Would you pick up Mike White for insurance to Dak or pick up Elijah Moore? Yeah, I would start Elijah Moore over Alec Pierce. And I think it's worth considering Elijah Moore over Donovan Peoples-Jones. I think that's pretty close. The matchup is just so interesting between the Jets and the Detroit Lions. The Lions just give up so many fantasy points, and you can see the Jets just going back and forth with them. The Jets have a tough secondary, but the ball is going to get to Amon-Ra St. Brown and DeAndre Swift. So I would think that, I would prefer picking up Elijah Moore. Just keep Dak around. Dak is fine. I don't think you need insurance unless your roster's lock. Yeah. Unless your roster's lock. And we're monitoring the Mike White situation too, because of the ribs injury that he suffered. He had to go to the hospital after the game. You're worried about Mike White long term. Would I start Ingram over Kittle? I would not do that this week. Evan Ingram, fewest tight end points allowed Dallas on the season, and negative 22% advantage per PFF. So this is one of those clear, matchup issues, and it's like what goes up must come down sort of thing. Obviously Ingram his production was not sustainable. He finished as the tight end 1 last week. But if we look at what Evan Ingram has done, he's also had, a tight end 50 finish, a tight end 27 finish, a tight end 39 finish, tight end 50, tight end 35 finish, tight end 26 finish. So we've seen really, really scary floors for Evan Ingram, and it just wasn't Christian Kirk's game, right? It was Evan Ingram's game in this one. And I think the Dallas Cowboys being a tough matchup is not good. But on the flip side, it's not just that Evan Ingram has a tough matchup. It's that George Kittle has a really good matchup. Seattle allows the second most fantasy points to the tight end position, and Kittle has a 17% advantage per PFF against his projected linebacker in this matchup. So George Kittle, I have him ranked over Evan Ingram. The matchups are there. And yes, Kittle has had his struggles as of late, right? 3 of the last 5 games finishing outside the top 24 of tight ends. But he finished as tight end 16 last week. He got 5 targets against Tampa. He went 4 for 84 with 2 touchdowns against Arizona, and Arizona also gives up a lot of fantasy points to the tight end position. So I'm still pretty comfortably firing up George Kittle against the Seattle Seahawks. Kittle did not play in the game against Seattle earlier in the season, so that's where I would go. Okay, Chig is not available. I'm sorry. We're going to keep going, though, with a few other players that you should consider picking up. Okay. And Damian Harris is probably rostered in your fantasy leagues. He missed last game due to injury and instead stepped in place Kevin Harris and Pierre Strong. Kevin Harris played 51% of the snaps once Ramondre Stevenson went down. We do not have an update yet as to Ramondre's ankle injury. So this is a contingency. Kevin Harris got 8 carries in this game. He ran 14 routes. Yes, he wasn't targeted, but you like that he ran that many routes. He only had 26 yards, but he had the touchdown. He finishes the running back 27. And Pierre Strong in this game, he played fewer snaps, only 26% of the snaps, but he was much more efficient on the ground. He had 5 carries and 9 routes, 2 receptions for a total of 90 yards. He had a touchdown as well, finishes the running back 12 on the week. And on a condensed week with only 26 teams playing, Kevin Harris and Pierre Strong, you would anticipate that they would be splitting carries and splitting touches along the way. Pierre Strong, the 4th round pick, his best comp per player profiler is Elijah Mitchell, 4.37 speed, 95th percentile speed score, 86th percentile burst score. You like the speed, you like the burst. He was an older prospect out of South Dakota State. And 2 of his 3 years, over 1,000 yards rushing at South Dakota State. His final year in 2021, he had almost 1,700 rushing yards. He had 18 total touchdowns, and he had a 7% target share at South Dakota State during his final year. So that was Pierre Strong. And then Kevin Harris, a 6th round pick, much younger prospect. His player profiler comp, Kerryon Johnson, slower, 4.6, 140. He was very bursty, 90th percentile burst score. But we are monitoring the Damian Harris situation. If Damian Harris was to be available along with Kevin Harris and Pierre Strong, I would probably put it at about 40% of the work goes to Damian Harris, 30% goes to Kevin Harris, maybe 20% goes to Pierre Strong, and then maybe a lost 10% everywhere else. Okay. So that's how I would project it out if we were to find out Ramondre's not going to play and Damian Harris is full go. He's not been really full go, but he's probably rostered in your leagues, and you need to be picking up these contingency running backs, Kevin Harris and Pierre Strong. The next player that you need to pick up is wide receiver Jameson Williams. Jameson Williams has increased his snap share in every game that he's been active. He, in week 13, he got 11% of the snaps. Week 14, 19% of the snaps. He increases routes from 2 to 6. He increases targets from 1 to 2. His 1 reception went for a touchdown. It was a 41-yard bomb to over Chandon Sullivan, who is a plus matchup to begin with. And this dude is just so explosive. We saw that in the 40-yard touchdown. He finishes the wide receiver 35 on just 1 catch, on his 1 catch. Now, my projections are that he plays about a third of the snaps in this week's game in week 15. You are adding Jameson Williams, not for week 15 when they face the Jets, because that's going to be a tough matchup. Even if he has, a good game, it's going to be on limited snaps and limited targets. I think he's going to continue to improve, and the Lions are going to continue to work him in. But Jameson Williams is one of those players that you are teeing up for week 17. Week 17 is where you want Jameson Williams, because not only is it the Chicago Bears, but I project that Jameson Williams is going to be at that 60 to 70% snap share by that point, and pretty much eating into that Khalif Raymond and Josh Reynolds work share. So Jameson Williams, he's a must add right now. It looks that he's about 30% rostered in your leagues. This is we get to the championship and I start a high upside wide receiver. Jameson Williams, the 12th overall pick in this year's draft. His player profiler comp is Will Fuller, 99th percentile speed, 40-yard dash was a 4.3. a 6'1", 180. He's built for speed and length. And that was on full display in this week's game against the Minnesota Vikings. So Jameson Williams, I expect to increase his snap share and target share. I don't know if he's going to get, to the double-digit fantasy points yet again for this week. But by the time we get to week 17, Jameson Williams is he's teeing up really nice for that Bears. And the Bears are one of the best matchups DVOA wise for passing. So Jameson Williams, add him now. I don't know if y'all heard, but Dameon Pierce is expected to miss 1 to 2 weeks. And look, I don't know who the fill-in is going to be, but if I'm wagering a bet, if I'm putting in more fab, I'm putting more fab in on Rex Burkhead, the sexy Rex Burkhead, the bald-headed beauty himself. I mean, at the beginning of the year, Rex Burkhead was the preferred running back for the Texans. 14 carries, 24 routes, 8 targets, 5 receptions, 70 total yards in week 1 against Indianapolis. He finished as the running back 23. And then he also had a couple other finishes this year, running back 17 against the Chargers, where he had 5 receptions for 39 total yards. He had a touchdown in that game. But what's interesting to me is last year, near the end of the season, Rex Burkhead also picked it up. If Dameon Pierce is going to miss, we've seen Rex Burkhead on the Houston Texans get 11, 16, 22, 16, and 12 rush attempts to end the year. He finished as the running back during that time. Rex Burkhead finished as the running back 24, 42, the running back 3 in week 16, the running back 24 in week 17, and then the running back 28 in week 18. So Rex Burkhead has a capability of catching the ball. He's a useful pass catcher. And then also, he's not super efficient on the ground, but he's, going to handle some of the workload. I would prefer him over the other option I'm going to share with you, but it wouldn't surprise me if the other option, Dare Ogunbowale, also gets involved. Okay, Ogunbowale did play more snaps last game than Rex Burkhead, but when Dameon Pierce went out, it was actually Rex Burkhead who played in the drives. Now, over the last 3 games, Dare Ogunbowale, 21% or more of the snaps. It seems like he had been slightly more involved. 12, 6, and 10 routes run. He had finished as the running back 35, 48, and 56 over the last 3 games. So Dare Ogunbowale is also a deeper league running back consideration with Dameon Pierce expected to miss 1 to 2 games. I would not be putting chips in or fab in to aggressively target Dare Ogunbowale. I would prefer Rex Burkhead, but Dare Ogunbowale last year in 2021, when he had 17 carries in week 16, 2 red zone carries, he finishes the running back 15 in PPR. He ran 29 routes. He had 72 total yards and a touchdown. And then in week 17, he had 9 carries. He also had a touchdown, 68 total yards. So we've seen a couple games where he's just been meh. And maybe that's all you need is a meh running back. But you need to be picking these particular players up in deeper leagues, especially if you need a pulse at running back. You're out Dameon Pierce. So, yeah, Rex Burkhead, Dare Ogunbowale, they're 2 running back considerations for your waiver wire. Would you start Dallas Goedert over Andrews when he comes back? Well, we can talk about Dallas Goedert. That's fine. I am a little concerned about Mark Andrews, right? We've got quarterback issues. If we get that Lamar Jackson is fully healthy and he is full go and he's not dealing with the knee or the shoulder or anything else, I would fire up Andrews, of course, over Goddard. But Goddard on the season, among tight ends, 4th in target share, 9th in target rate. right? 7th in target quality rating. So Jalen Hurts was getting him the ball. Catchable target rate was 2nd among tight ends. He was 3rd in fantasy points per game among tight ends before the injury. He was 3rd in yard. He's still 2nd in yards after catch. And he's like, he's only played 9 games. Dallas Goedert, his last game was week 10. Okay. So yeah, you're probably starting Dallas Goedert over Andrews if we hear that Lamar Jackson is still not 100%. I have Dameon Pierce. I can't trust Rex and Dare. I know there's not a high level of trust. You know somebody's going to get majority of work, and if I'm betting, I think it's Rex Burkhead, but that's like a 55 to 45 type of bet that it's Rex Burkhead over Dare. Like, I'm not giving much of an edge there to Rex Burkhead. So no, my level of confidence in the Rex Burkhead versus Dare Goombawale call is not high, but I'm still leaning Rex Burkhead if you need a desperation running back. This player I want you to check out. It is Taysom Hill. And there have been plenty of fantasy managers who have dropped Taysom Hill because he's been inconsistent, because he was just on his bye. Like, it's worth checking out if Taysom Hill is available in your leagues. We know what kind of ceiling Taysom Hill has had, and he's also been getting some snaps at quarterback as of late. And I wonder if over the bye, Taysom Hill gets a little bit more of those quarterback wildcat runs. Those are extremely valuable. Over the last 3 games, Taysom Hill has eclipsed 50% of snaps, and he hadn't done that any game this year before week 11. Taysom Hill this year, we saw in week 1, 15.3 fantasy points, tight end 3, tight end 5, or tight end number 1 in week 5 against Seattle. He was tight end 11, week 7, tight end 13, week 11, tight end 5 this past week 13 before the bye. But here's the thing. He gets the Atlanta Falcons this week, and Taysom Hill, last time he played the Atlanta Falcons, 15.3 fantasy points, mostly on the rushing touchdowns, but the ceiling exists for Taysom Hill. So please check out your waiver wire, see if he's available. It's possible. I've seen him on a few waiver wires. I think in some of the places I've seen, he's about 40% rostered. So just check out and see if Taysom Hill is available. There are some fantasy managers who just dropped him. Pick him up. He's a high upside tight end, especially in the tight end wasteland that we have. Like, after David Njoku, like, who else do you have confidence in at tight end, right? I mean, I mentioned Chig Okonkwo, but if Treylon Burks is there, there's a problem with the target share, right? So, like, I think Taysom Hill could very easily fit into that top 10 of tight ends in rankings this week. Is the possibility of a touchdown. It's a good matchup against Atlanta. So, and the increased snap share that we've seen from Taysom Hill. So I think Taysom Hill is a player that needs to not be on your waiver wire. If your trade deadline hasn't passed, or if trades are still available, see if you can buy Taysom Hill on the cheap. A deep league consideration, wide receiver Tutu Atwell, the former second-round pick in 2021. Everyone was like, why did the Rams draft Tutu Atwell? This guy, 5'9", 155, not amazing production at Louisville. He only ran a 4.4 40, and yes, it was 80th percentile 40-yard dash, but it was a 5th percentile speed score given his BMI. He's got great agility, but the reason why you're considering Tutu Atwell is because he's gone from 40% snaps to now 61% of snaps in week 14 against the Raiders. He had 9 targets, 5 receptions for 50 yards. He is getting wide receiver rotation along with Skoranek and Van Jefferson. And Tutu Atwell playing out of the slot makes sense. That's going to be a good fit for him. Like, is he going to get 9 targets? I don't know if 9 targets is going to be the move, but if the Packers are going to give up any wide receiver fantasy points, it's probably going to be to the slot. because Jair Alexander is on the outside. So Tutu Atwell, I think, is going to be a trusted target for Baker Mayfield moving forward. Tutu Atwell set a season high in routes run. Obviously, season high in targets and receptions. But we've also seen some big plays from Tutu Atwell, right? In week 5, he had a 54-yard reception, 96 air yards, and 2 targets. Week 11 against New Orleans, he had 1 target, 1 reception. He had the touchdown, 62 receiving yards, 46 air yards, finished as the wide receiver 24 that week in PPR. So Tutu Atwell in space, he's got great speed. And if Baker Mayfield can find him, right, Tutu Atwell is an interesting deep league must-add wide receiver. All right, we've got a few more questions. Lawrence, Watson, Goff, Mike White, or Tannehill? Let's talk through a couple of these. I'll pull up my quarterback rankings and talk through a few of them. Trevor Lawrence, you are probably not starting this week. The Dallas Cowboys give up the 3rd fewest fantasy points to the quarterback position, and they have the toughest DVOA, passing DVOA, so they are extremely tough against the pass. Deshaun Watson gets Baltimore this week. Baltimore's defense is also very difficult. Jared Goff, gets the Jets, and when we talked about this being a higher over-under, but also the Jets are really tough secondary. Sauce Gardner is going to probably shut down the DJ Chark routes. Mike White is interesting if he gets full clearance and is full go to play, but I'm monitoring that situation. Instead, I think that it's Ryan Tannehill, who's kind of a sleeper. The Tennessee LA Chargers game is one of the highest over-unders on the week, and Tannehill is super matchup dependent. If we look at the games where he poo-pooed out, okay, Ryan Tannehill did terrible against Buffalo. He did bad against Indy. He did poorly against Washington. He did poorly against Indy again. He played poorly against Cincinnati, and he played poorly against Philadelphia. All of those teams, except maybe Washington, have a really, really tough secondary. Really difficult secondary. Whereas Ryan Tannehill finishes the quarterback 11 against the Giants. They've got a pretty decent they're a pretty decent matchup in the secondary. The Las Vegas Raiders give up a ton of fantasy points to quarterbacks. He finishes the quarterback 8 that week. Denver, who's actually usually pretty stingy, he finished as the quarterback 9, so he played well. Quarterback 11 against Green Bay, and then the quarterback 12 against Jacksonville. Now, the Chargers give up a lot of fantasy points, and with this being a potential shootout game, you could see Tannehill leaning on his wide receivers, on Okonkwo and Treylon Burks if Burks is back. This is one of those games where, you don't want to underrate. And right now, Tannehill is the consensus quarterback 20, and that's way too low. Way too low. When you've got some really, really tough, back-end quarterback 1, high-end quarterback 2 matchups. I mentioned Trevor Lawrence, I mentioned Jared Goff, but also Geno Smith has a really tough matchup against the San Francisco 49ers on Thursday. So Tannehill is one of those quarterbacks that I would be considering starting over, the Geno Smiths, Jared Goffs, Trevor Lawrences of the world, given the matchup, given the potential upside. And I think I would do that if we find out Treylon Burks is good to go this week. So I'm leaning Ryan Tannehill here. Dak versus Jacksonville or Geno versus San Francisco? We're going Dak, baby. This is the Jacksonville Jaguars are the 3rd best passing matchup per Football Outsiders DVOA. Dak Prescott, the Jaguars give up lots of fantasy points. That's what we need to know. But Dak Prescott, yeah, he finishes the quarterback 15 last week, but still 284 passing yards against Houston. We saw 18 fantasy points against Indianapolis, 17 against the Giants, 21 against Minnesota, 21 against Green Bay. The Chicago game, that was really, really nice. 26 fantasy points. And then the first game back off of injury against Detroit, we can wipe that away a little bit, only 12 fantasy points. So really, Dak Prescott has not disappointed this year, and you should be starting him against Jacksonville. Other running backs are Najee, B-Rob, Jeff Wilson, Madison, Mason. Yeah. I think I would pick up, if I needed to start, Brian Robinson probably has a really good matchup. So I would go Najee Harris and Brian Robinson. Yeah, and then I would just keep Mason. I would trust Jordan Mason as a handcuff over the Rex Burkheads or Dario Gumbawales of the world. That's how I would go there, Millie. Brixico, Connor, McKinnon, Walker, Etienne, Pickens, McLaurin need 2 plus 2 flex, full PPR. Man, Brixico, we are getting into the grind here. Fine. I will do my best here on a Tuesday night to answer your James Conner, McKinnon, Walker, Etienne, Pickens, McLaurin. Man, oh man, we've got 6, and I need to pick 4 of them. Okay, so James Conner right now, he gets a really tough matchup against Denver, but he handles so much work. And it's hard for you to say, well, he's not going to do well. No, James Conner finishes the running back 5 last week against an extremely difficult New England defense. 15 for 85, 6 receptions for 29 yards. You are starting James Conner no matter what. Okay, so you're starting James Conner. You're probably not starting Kenneth Walker. Kenneth Walker, okay, there are two options, and it's going to fall down from there. Kenneth Walker plays. Kenneth Walker doesn't play. Kenneth Walker doesn't play, obviously you're not playing him. But if he plays, there's also two ways in which it could fall. He could play full complement. He could not play full complement. We don't know. There's a lot of I don't knows about Kenneth Walker because the ankle injury is concerning for me. It's also that this matchup is extremely, extremely difficult. The San Francisco 49ers allow the fewest fantasy points to the running back position. So there's already a cap ceiling. They are the second toughest rush DVOA per Football Outsiders. And the San Francisco 49ers have a PFF projected 56% rush block advantage over the Seattle Seahawks offensive line. So if Kenneth Walker is limited in any way, this could be an absolute floor game and destroy you. That's a problem. So if I'm picking 2 running backs out of this group, right, it's not going to be Walker. And then the real concern too is that, yes, Walker has a bad matchup, but so does Travis Etienne. The Dallas Cowboys give up the 4th fewest fantasy points to the running back position. They are the 6th toughest at DVOA, in the DVOA metric per Football Outsiders. And the Dallas Cowboys have a 48% run block advantage over the Jacksonville Jaguars offensive line per PFF. It's an extremely negative matchup. I just roll the dice with the running back 1 from this past week, and that's Jerick McKinnon. And right now, Jerick McKinnon is the running back 38 in consensus on Fantasy Pros. Make it make sense to me. He just finished as the running back 1. He finished as the running back 16 last week in a half PPR. Yes, it's only 14 rush attempts over the last 2 weeks, but he's had 73 rushing yards during that time, 11 targets, 9 receptions, total receiving yards 121. He's had 3 touchdowns during that span, and Houston gives up the most fantasy points to the running back position. This is about matchup and one game at a time, Brixico. So I would go with Connor and McKinnon if I were picking running backs. And then if I had to pick a wide receiver here, McLaurin. Okay. So, but if I needed to pick 4, I would go Connor, McKinnon, McLaurin, and then I would go with, well, it comes down to Pickens or Etienne for me, right? Is the difference between Pickens gonna be, enough? Because it's Pittsburgh versus Carolina, which is going to be a low over under. I don't know the exact number, but I would imagine that it's like 38-40. Okay. It's not going to be a very high over under, but Pickens has an individual matchup this week. He's projected by PFF to run the majority of his routes against Henderson, CJ Henderson of the Carolina Panthers, and he's projected to have a 74% advantage. Okay, so the way PFF does the wide receiver cornerback matchups is 0% to 100%, and 50% is like an average matchup, like it could go either way, like whatever. 74% advantage is a pretty good one. It's respectable, right? The majority of the advantage is going to go towards George Pickens in his matchup against Henderson that PFF projects. So I don't know if that's going to be enough to get you to Travis Etienne volume, though, right? Because George Pickens, right, over the last few weeks, like he has 5 targets over the last 2 weeks. That volume is not going to get it done. Like, it's the volume argument for Etienne at this point, because Etienne, even though he has an extremely difficult matchup against the Dallas Cowboys, he had 17 carries against Tennessee, and he had 16 total touches against Detroit. So I think I'm going Connor, McKinnon, Etienne, and McLaurin if I'm picking for their Brixico. Yeah, that's been tough. That Etienne and Walker have been really, really disappointing this year, or at least over the last couple games, mostly due to the injuries that they've been recovering from. All right, we got a heavy-hitting question from Ruben from YouTube. Brock Purdy or Daniel Jones? Man, Brock Purdy is dealing with an oblique injury. He's the quarterback 18 in consensus. He's finished as the quarterback 18 and quarterback 8 over the last 2 weeks, whereas Daniel Jones gets Washington. And the last time Daniel Jones played Washington, he finishes the quarterback 12. He went 25 of 31, threw for 200 yards, rushed the ball 12 times for 71 yards. He had a touchdown, 17 fantasy points. If I'm leaning on who will have a better matchup, I think it's still Daniel Jones. I think the slight edge goes to him due to the rushing and not having to deal with an injury. We aren't 100% sure that Brock Purdy is going to start this game. If he's healthy, he's going to start, but I'd still lean Daniel Jones in that choice. Ricardo from YouTube, should I start Mike Williams or Christian Watson? Oh, man. Heavy-hitting questions. Also, pat myself on the back on the Mike Williams call. He was a top 24 wide receiver. In fact, he was a top 5 wide receiver last week. So, it was a good call to start him. That's what I had all of you doing. I said you really didn't have a better choice. The upside, the matchup was just so good for Mike Williams. And then this week, Mike Williams also gets an extremely plus matchup. He gets the Tennessee Titans. And the Tennessee Titans give up the most fantasy points to wide receivers on the year, and they are the 5th most advantageous pass defense in the Football Outsiders DVOA metric. Mike Williams, of course, coming off the wide receiver 5 finish. Christian Watson does have a positive matchup. The Green Bay Packers have a 43% pass block advantage projected per PFF over the LA Rams. We are awaiting the Aaron Donald news. Aaron Donald missed the last game, and that would be really good for the Green Bay offensive line. Christian Watson, just to remind you, has finished over the last 4 games as the wide receiver 2, 5, 8, and 6. And now he gets the LA Rams. Jalen Ramsey has been burned, but I think it's clear that Christian Watson is the number 1 receiving option by far over Allen Lazard or any other receiving option. So I am leaning Mike Williams, but I think it's a lot closer than what the Fantasy Pros rankings have them at. Right now, Christian Watson is the consensus wide receiver 23, and Mike Williams is the consensus wide receiver 15. And I think that it's going to be a lot closer than that. Like, you got to move Christian Watson, over Amari Cooper. So I think Christian Watson is right there. Then the second part of the question, thoughts on Eckler after Keenan Allen and Mike Williams are back now. And, Keenan Allen went off, right? He was a trusted piece of the backfield against the Miami Dolphins. He finished as the running back 4 in half PPR. He had 8 receptions and on 8 targets, 59 receiving yards. He had a touchdown in this game. He was really inefficient on the ground, which we knew coming in. I warned y'all he was not going to be very efficient, but that was the third most rush attempts on the season. And he gets a tough rushing matchup again this week against Tennessee. I mentioned, Tennessee gives up a lot of fantasy points to the wide receiver. They do not give up a lot of fantasy points to the running back position. They give up the third fewest points to running backs. They are the toughest in DVOA metric per Football Outsiders. And per PFF, they have a 44% run block advantage projected over the LA Chargers. So if you're banking on Austin Eckler in a standard league, like maybe that's not as advisable, but you're still firing up Eckler. Like he's a bona fide running back 1. I don't think we're getting too cute here. You're firing up Eckler, you're firing up Allen, you're firing up Mike Williams. Even though the rushing matchup is tough for Eckler, it's not going to be, Eckler's bread and butter is not in the rushing game, right? I think he averages like 5 or 6 fantasy points per game in rushing fantasy points. So there you go. I would lean Mike Williams, but they're both high upside wide receiver 2s for me. That's how I would view Mike Williams versus Christian Watson in the same breath. Omar Rios from YouTube, thanks for tuning in. Fields or Herbert in week 15? Let's pull up the quarterback rankings. Justin Herbert, I mentioned in the previous answer about Mike Williams or Christian Watson, how the LA Chargers have a really positive pass catching matchup, and that's going to translate for Justin Herbert. I've moved Herbert up to my quarterback 4 on the week. The Tennessee Titans give up the second most fantasy points to the quarterback position, and as I mentioned earlier, the 5th highest or 5th best passing matchup per Football Outsiders DVOA. So Herbert is, a set it and forget it quarterback 1. He's expert consensus quarterback 5. He's finished, as the quarterback 3 against Arizona. He finishes the quarterback 9 against Vegas and quarterback 10 against Miami. But this is an even smashier matchup. And you're thinking to yourself, like, okay, is it Herbert or is it going to be Fields? And Fields, last time we saw him, he's finished as the quarterback 8, 5, 5, 1, 1, 7, and 5. And you're like, that is amazing. It is amazing. But this is a tough matchup, not just for the passing, but also for the rushing. Usually Justin Fields is able to beat the other team's weaknesses. Like if they're good at stopping the run, he'll pass the ball. If they're good at stopping the pass, he'll run the ball. But the Philadelphia Eagles are good at everything. They allow the fewest fantasy points to the quarterback position. They are the second toughest matchup for passing DVOA. And the Philadelphia Eagles have a 32% pass block advantage over the Chicago Bears offensive line per PFF. And you're really tempted to start Fields. I just think that his ceiling is going to be capped a little bit. I have Fields at quarterback 7. So in most cases, you are still starting Justin Fields. There are only 6 quarterbacks that I have ahead of Justin Fields. Like I have Fields ahead of Tua. I have Fields ahead of Geno. I have Fields ahead of Kirk Cousins and Goff and Lawrence and Brady. But I have Jalen Hurts ahead of Fields, which makes sense. I have Patrick Mahomes ahead of Fields. I have Josh Allen and Herbert, and then I have Burrow ahead of Fields. And I might move Burrow down a little bit. I need to, sift that through. But for right now, I think it's Herbert's matchup is just an extremely high ceiling type of game, whereas the Bears versus the Eagles could be one of those struggle bus matchups, at least for Chicago to get things going on the offensive side of the ball. So maybe I'm wrong, and maybe Fields is able to work some magic. But we also have to remember, since we last saw Justin Fields, he's lost Darnell Mooney. And Chase Claypool, reports just came out today that the coaches are not confident in Chase Claypool's knowledge of the playbook. So that's down 2 potential very good pass catchers. You're left with what? Equanimous St. Brown? Cole Kmet? I mean, yes, we like Cole Kmet, but if the Eagles know that there's not an alpha to defend, good luck getting the ball down the field. And so they're just going to focus on containing Justin Fields and making him beat them through the air. I wouldn't be surprised if Fields is a little more bottled up. Like, could Fields still go like 8 for 50, 8 for 60, and maybe fall in the end zone? Yeah. And then he salvages his day, but it's still not getting into that like quarterback 1, quarterback 3 conversation. Give me Justin Herbert in this possible smash matchup. B growing stuff. Questions about tight ends. I made the playoffs with Darren Waller and Dallas Goedert are on my wire. Should I pick up one of them? If so, who over Everett rest of season? I would go with Dallas Goedert. Darren Waller has had his consistency issues is my concern. And if I'm picking one between Waller and Goddard, it's 100% going to be Dallas Goedert. I mean, Dallas Goedert, number 9 in target separation, number 1 in yards per team pass attempt. This is among tight ends. Number 1 in yards per target, number 2 in yards per route run, number 1 in target accuracy. Okay, this is a tight end who, yes, he's number 11 in total touchdowns, but he hasn't played since week 10. Number 4 in target share, number 7 in target quality rating. So I am absolutely, if Dallas Goedert is still on your waiver wire, pick him up. I mean, we'll see if he's active. I don't know. But Gerald Everett, like, isn't a bad option either. Like, I don't want to besmirch the good name of Gerald Everett, especially since, I tirelessly worked to try to get Gerald Everett drafted as much as I could this offseason. Gerald Everett also in this week's matchup has a pretty positive matchup. He gets Tennessee, as I mentioned before, against the wide receivers. They're very porous, but also against the tight ends. Tennessee gives up the 3rd most fantasy points to the tight end position. And Gerald Everett has a 22% advantage per PFF over his linebacker counterpart in Tennessee. So Gerald Everett, yes, he hasn't quite hit the ceilings that we wanted to see him hit as of late, right? He's floated between like tight end 25 and tight end 6 over the last 5 weeks, but he's been getting 8 and 8 and 6 and 4 and 7 and 9 and 6 and 6 and 10 and 4 targets. So I think you're riding with Gerald Everett until you get Goddard back, hopefully. But I would start Goddard, even week 1, as long as he's full go, over Gerald Everett. Giovanni Sierra, Rex Burkhead, or Elijah Moore for the rest of the playoffs? Yeah, I think you're going with Elijah Moore. You're going with Elijah Moore. This week could be the week where we are reminded how good Elijah Moore really is. He gets the Detroit Lions. I've talked about that before, but also it's not just that Elijah Moore gets Detroit. It's also that Elijah Moore gets Jacksonville in week 16, who we know is one of the best fantasy matchups for quarterbacks and wide receivers. And then in week 17 at Seattle, a very sneaky, very, very sneaky smash matchup. So Giovanni Sierra, I would go with Elijah Moore. I mean, Damian Pierce could be back in 2 weeks. And then you're like, well, it'll maybe eat into Rex Burkhead's share. Maybe Dario Ogunbowale is the right play. But either way, I'm going with Elijah Moore 100 out of 100 times over Rex Burkhead. The only way, 99 out of 100. The only way that I'm thinking about is if it's like a 32-team league and you need to start 2 running backs and you already are good at wide receiver. But still, like I still think Elijah Moore is like a top 24-ish wide receiver for this week. That's the kind of upside that he has. So give me Elijah Moore rest of season as well. Be growing stuff. I'm starting Jacobs, Aaron Jones, AJ Brown, Juju, Kamara this week over Isaiah Pacheco, Traylon Brooks, Sutton, Cordell Patterson, Chark. Thoughts? Any questions? Any changes? Yeah, good. You're not starting Chark. You're probably not starting Sutton. I like Pacheco this week. Let me pull up the running back because Houston gives up the most fantasy points to the running back position. Alvin Kamara has a really tough matchup against Atlanta, and that's kind of surprising, actually. The last time against Atlanta, Alvin Kamara finished as the running back 47. He went 9 for 39 on the ground, 3 receptions, 4 targets, 7 receiving yards. He only scored 6 fantasy points. That is really tough. I would not be starting Kamara against Atlanta. In addition, another reason why is that the Atlanta Falcons are projected 44% advantage, run block advantage per PFF over the New Orleans offensive line. So that's a bad matchup for Kamara. He's shown in the past that he's struggled. Kamara has not done well as of late, right? He's coming off the bye, but 3 of the last 4 weeks, he's been running back 36 or worse. He was running back 45 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers where he had 15 opportunities. So Alvin Kamara is a sit for me. I would start Isaiah Pacheco over Kamara. If Traylon Burks, I think the rest of them are fine. So Jacobs, Aaron Jones, AJ Brown, Juju Smith-Schuster, and Isaiah Pacheco is how I would go. Their be growing stuff. All right. If you like my content, make sure you hit that red subscribe button. It really, really helps the channel. We're almost at 500 subscribers, and it's all because of y'all interacting with each other, asking questions, putting up the comments. I'm grateful for you. You know that I put out content that tries to cater to you and answer your questions and get to you. I'm really grateful for that. This is a little later live stream than I anticipated because my daughter would not go down to sleep tonight. So I appreciate your patience. And if you like the channel, if you like the content, make sure you're hitting that red subscribe button. All right, everyone. I really appreciate that. Millie C asks, I have the Eagles and Chiefs DST. Who do I start this week? Okay. Well, I did do an update on my DST. Now, of course, this is Tuesday, and you're going to be like, well, stalled or like, I might have to make changes. Yes, just pay attention to, you can ask this later on in the week, see if anything has changed. I also put out in my Fantasy Data article, my rankings versus consensus, and those always updated my Fantasy Pros rankings. So I have the Eagles and Chiefs. The Eagles are my DST 3 this week against Chicago. And the Chiefs are my DST 1 against Houston. So I would have the Chiefs over the Eagles, but they are both elite options. So I think you're not going to go wrong here. It's just that I think the Chiefs, they're going to shut down Houston. They're Davis Mills, yikes. And without Nico Collins or Brandon Cooks and without Damian Pierce too, this team is really lacking offensive weapons. So I think the Chiefs DST is the way to go here. All right, Chris Shoemaker, Terry McLaurin, or Christian Watson this week? That is a great question, and I think that you're going to have to go with Christian Watson pretty comfortably. I mentioned that the Green Bay Packers have a really positive pass block advantage. It's also another week that Aaron Rodgers' finger and thumb has been healing, and even with that thumb, right, Christian Watson has finished as the wide receiver 2, wide receiver 5, wide receiver 8, and wide receiver 6. Yes, a lot of touchdown dependency, but that just, that Aaron Rodgers will hyper target certain players in the red zone and the end zone. So let's not be surprised when there are bunches of touchdowns. Did y'all forget about Robert Tonyan? Did you? Huh? Did you forget about, or Alan Lazard last year? Christian Watson is a touchdown maker, and he's extremely athletic. So I'm starting Christian Watson over Terry McLaurin, but let's not poo-poo McLaurin. McLaurin's got a really good matchup. Okay, so he shouldn't be outside of your top 24 of wide receivers this week. He has a 93% wide receiver cornerback advantage against the New York Giants cornerback core. And the last time that Terry McLaurin played the Giants was in week 13, where he went 8 for 105. He had a touchdown, had 12 targets, and was the wide receiver 8 on the week. So I think it's a really positive matchup, but I would lean Christian Watson over Terry McLaurin, but I think it's a lot closer than what the consensus is giving right now. Okay. Should I drop James Cook for Pierre Strong? Well, Pierre Strong right now, I don't think he was the one. Yeah, Pierre Strong, I worked behind Kevin Harris, so I really wouldn't. I wouldn't drop Pierre Strong for James Cook. I wouldn't do that. Thomas Dodson, need running back help start 2. Zeke Barkley, K9, I assume that's Kenneth Walker III. Dobbins, if not Dobbins, flex 1, Metcalf, DPJ, or Dobbins. So I like Dobbins this week a lot. He's a player who I will have written up in my start sit column as a start, a very firm start this week. J.K. Dobbins right now is the consensus running back 21, but he gets Cleveland this week. And yes, he missed the Cleveland matchup last time in week 7, but against Pittsburgh, he went 15 for 120. He had a nice breakaway run. Yes, he didn't finish it the way that we wanted to. It was a little concerning, but he still got a touchdown, finishes the running back 9, and this is exactly what we wanted to see from J.K. Dobbins, handling a season-high carries right out of the gate, 120 rushing yards. He got the touchdown, and now he gets the Cleveland Browns. And the Cleveland Browns allow the 3rd most fantasy points to the running back position, and they are the 3rd most favorable in rushing DVOA matchup per Football Outsiders. So J.K. Dobbins is a smash start this week as a comfortable running back 2. I do have, Barkley and Ezekiel Elliott ranked ahead, but I think it's a lot closer than what the rankings have. Like Zeke right now is a positive matchup against Jacksonville. Let's not put it 2 ways. Barkley has a tough matchup against Washington, and maybe we need to move Barkley down a little bit. He's the consensus running back 10, and the last time that he played Washington, he finished as the running back 9, though. 18 for 63. He had 5 receptions for 18 receiving yards. He had a touchdown, but I don't know if J.K. Dobbins can. Oh, man. Yeah, I think I'm really bullish on Dobbins. I don't know if I can get him into that top 10 this week. Maybe I will. Maybe I'll have to get a little spicy. All right, J.K. here. You heard it first. I'm going to put it on the reels if I get it right. Y'all can shame me if I get it wrong. J.K. Dobbins, top 12 running back this week again. His consensus is running back 21, so this is a significant shift. Let's do it. You saw live rankings change just here. Boom. Let's go. Okay. Yes, we're going to go J.K. Dobbins over Joe Mixon. We're going to go J.K. Dobbins over Ezekiel Elliott, over Travis Etienne, over Najee Harris, over Zonovan Knight. Let's go, baby. Okay, so it looks like I'm going with Barkley and J.K. Dobbins. Okay, there you go, Thomas. All right, if y'all haven't hit that red subscribe button, make sure you do. It really helps the channel. I'm answering your questions. You hitting that subscribe button helps me. So it's a two-way sort of thing. Hopefully you like what you're hearing. If you like it, hit that subscribe button. Raw Dog from YouTube. Okay, the question is about tight ends. Which tight end is Raw Dog going to start? And that is Okonkwo, Kmet, or Dulcich. And I think it's Dulcich. I'm pretty comfortable saying it's Dulcich. Okay, Dulcich right now is the consensus tight end 7. He was the tight end 4 and tight end 12 over the last 2 weeks. But Okonkwo is very close. Okay, and Okonkwo over the last couple weeks, the tight end 9 and tight end 2. So you have to be really bullish, but I think that Treylon Burks returns, which is why I'm leaning Dulcich. If we find out that Treylon Burks is out yet again, Okonkwo over Dulcich is my take. And I think Cole Kmet, unfortunately, has been like relegated to this back end tight end too, even though I think he's going to get a little bit more volume like he's had before the bye. The 5 games before the bye, Cole Kmet, 6 targets, 7 targets, 4 targets, 6 targets, and 7 targets. 3 of those games, he finished as a top 7 tight end. But in the 2 games he didn't, he finished as tight end 16 and tight end 24. Okay, so Cole Kmet, I do not have confidence in him as a top 12 or top 10 tight end. He's got some tough matchups. He has a negative 22% linebacker matchup per PFF against Philadelphia. And as I mentioned earlier, the Philadelphia Eagles have a 32% pass block advantage over the Chicago Bears. So could Cole Kmet go like 4 for 40 on 6 targets? Yeah, and that's 6 fantasy points, and it's not going to do much for you. So, like, give me the upside of Taysom Hill over Cole Kmet, right? Obviously, Chig, Okonkwo, you're going to put over Cole Kmet, even if Treylon Burks is back, I think, even so. But that's how I would attack that. Okay. Thomas is asking about David Njoku or Goddard. Njoku's been playing good. Who knows what we're going to get from Goddard? Yeah, is Goddard even back? Like, is that a thing? Like, I don't think Dallas Goedert is back yet. So for this week, it's obviously David Njoku. I mean, he gets Baltimore, which is not an easy matchup. But the last time he played Baltimore, 7 for 71, finished as the tight end 5 on 7 targets. So you're firing up David Njoku as a mid-pack tight end 1. And when Goddard comes back, like, you're just going to ride the Njoku train, right? You're not going to need to fire up Dallas Goedert that first week back. And looking at who David Njoku has the rest of the way, it's New Orleans and it's Washington. It's not like, those are going to be extremely shut. I mean, New Orleans and Washington are tough tight end matchups, but David Njoku doesn't play your typical tight end position. He plays, more of a slot and sometimes out wide. Looking at what target share he's gotten this year, 10, 7, 6, 6, 7, 7, and 9 targets on the season for David Njoku. I mean, what a revelation. He was one of my most drafted tight ends in best ball this year. Randy Miller, favorite analyst. Oh my gosh, Randy, I am honored. I really am. That means a lot to me. So I appreciate you. Let's do this. Pick one running back, one wide receiver. ETN, Kamara, Mike Williams, Watson, or Godwin. If I'm picking between Kamara and ETN, I'm going ETN. If I'm going between Williams, Watson, or Godwin, I'm going to go, let me just double check my rankings, but I said Mike Williams over Christian Watson earlier, and I'm going to stick to that. But Godwin is right after as well. And the reason why, so I have it Mike Williams, Christian Watson, Chris Godwin in my rankings back to back to back, actually. That's pretty funny that you asked that, Randy, because Chris Godwin has finished as the wide receiver 31 and 40 each of the last 2 games, despite having 22 targets. He's getting the Deontay Johnson treatment. Am I right or am I right? Chris Godwin has morphed into Deontay Johnson. You heard it here. Okay. It's also that Cincinnati gives up the 5th fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver position, whereas Mike Williams, I've talked ad nauseum. I've talked for over an hour about how Mike Williams and the LA Chargers have an extremely high upside game on the outlook, and Christian Watson also has a positive matchup. So I'm going with Mike Williams ever so slightly over Christian Watson. But I'm probably wrong there. It's probably Watson over Williams, but whatever. I think they're in that same tier. And then ETN over Kamara pretty comfortably. All right, rock out. 2 running backs, 1 wide receiver, 2 flex. Kamara, Swift, B-Rob, Pacheco, Olave, Zay Jones, Dotson pick up the Washington D this week. Well, let's talk about the Washington D. Let's start with the last first. The first, that's out of the Bible, right? The first shall be last and last shall be first. So the Washington are my 8th DST for the week. Do with that what you will. Okay. And then when it comes to wide receivers, all right, this is where we're getting one wide receiver. You are definitely starting Chris Olave this week. The Atlanta Falcons allow the 5th most fantasy points to the wide receiver position. They are the 4th most positive pass matchup DVOA. The New Orleans Saints have a 26% pass block advantage over the Atlanta defensive line. And the last time Chris Olave played the Atlanta Falcons, very limited snaps, 3 for 41. 3 for 41 in week 1. So I think this is a bounce back game for Chris Olave. His consensus is wide receiver 24. I like Olave. The Zay Jones love is not there this week. He gets Dallas, which is the toughest pass DVOA. And I think this is more of a floor game for Zay Jones. I think he's going to finish more in that like wide receiver 36 to wide receiver 45 range, even with all of the targets he's been getting. Dallas is just such a tough defense. I'm not confident starting him. Wide receiver 30 is the expert consensus right now. Whereas Jahan Dotson, I mentioned Terry McLaurin having a really positive matchup, but Jahan Dotson got back into the swing of things. And actually, Jahan Dotson is one of my must-add wide receivers for the week. He finished as the wide receiver 18 the last time that they played the Giants. He went 5 for 54. He had the touchdown, 9 targets. That's what's super encouraging for Jahan Dotson. Not only the targets, but also that he got back to his weeks 1, 2, and 3 snap share. He played 85% of snaps. He had not played more than 67% of snaps since week 3 against Philadelphia. Now, weeks 1 through 4, Jahan Dotson, 3 of those 4 games, he finished as the wide receiver 25 or better. And now in week 13, he finished as the wide receiver 18, and he had 87 air yards in that game. I'm pretty bullish on Jahan Dotson this week. But back to your question, are we going to start Jahan Dotson over Zay Jones? And I think that is the case this week. I think that's the case, barring any like weather or any dust settling. I do like Jahan Dotson over Zay Jones. And then let's see. We're starting Swift this week. We absolutely are. Robinson has a really good matchup, running back wise. Let me pull that up against the Giants. Let's see. Brian Robinson. Yeah, the Giants are the second best rush against DVOA on the season. And last time that Brian Robinson rushed against the Giants, 21 for 96. He had 2 receptions for 15 yards. He finishes the running back 17.5 PPR, 12 fantasy points. Imagine he falls in the end zone. He's a top 7 running back. And that's what happened in Atlanta, right? If we look at what Brian Robinson did last in week 12 against Atlanta, 18 for 105, 2 for 20 on the ground. He had the touchdown, finishes the running back 4.5 PPR. So I think this is a positive matchup. If I'm picking players, I'm going to go with Swift, Brian Robinson, Pacheco, Olave. That gets me with 2 running backs, a flex. Olave's the wide receiver. And then I think I'm going with Jahan Dotson over Alvin Kamara. That's how I'll go. Another half PPR, D-Hop versus Denver, Swift versus the Jets, ETN versus Dallas. Pick one. Yeah, I think you're going to go with DeAndre Swift against the Jets. I think that's how I would lean. And I know that Swift burned us last week with 6 for 21 on the ground, 3 for 18. But I think this game is going to be a little more shootout-y. And if the Jets shut down the wide receivers, you could see Goff looking closer to the line of scrimmage, and that's going to bode well for DeAndre Swift. So I think that he is the play here. I am really concerned about DeAndre Hopkins accessing any type of ceiling with Colt McCoy rest of season. And then ETN is not catching passes, and it's a tough rush defense against Dallas. So I'm going with Swift. I'm going with Swift against the Jets. Am I worried about Gus Edwards in the way of Dobbins? No? I think it'll be like a 50 to 40 split and then 10% sprinkled in elsewhere among running backs. And could it be Gus Edwards who breaks off some big runs against Cleveland? It's possible. But I think J.K. Dobbins, right out of the gate, 15 carries off of the injury. I think I'm not too worried about J.K. Dobbins. Appreciate the breakdown. So you go Barkley over Zeke when Zeke has been a touchdown mechanic in going against Jacksonville. Thomas, you're making me think about it. And as we get closer to it, I'll keep thinking about it, but I'll consider it. I do agree with you. Ezekiel Elliott has been getting a lot of moves, and this game could be very interesting for Zeke because Zeke and Pollard are not going to go away anytime soon. But here's what's crazy is maybe it's not crazy. Tony Pollard, expert consensus running back 6, but Tony Pollard has finished as the running back 7 or better in 5 of the last 6 games. So maybe it's not that crazy, Tony Pollard. So there you go. Raw Dog, thanks, man. Your depth breakdowns are awesome. Definitely got my sub. I appreciate you. Thank you. And if you haven't subbed already, make sure you're hitting that subscribe button. It really, really helps the channel. We are very much approaching 500 subscribers. So I'm just want to take a moment and say thank you to all of you for subscribing. If you did in fact subscribe to the Best Bell Fantasy Football channel, right? I really, really appreciate it. It's been great having all of you on. Make sure you're hitting that red subscribe button. It really, really helps. And it'll be great for me. It'll be great for you, for me to keep pumping out this content for you, because I do it for y'all, right? It makes me feel good. But of course, like, y'all are what make the community so great. So thank you for doing that. All right, let's take a look here. Been using the Pats D, but they look to have hard matchups. And this is Lucius Vorenus 44. Is it time to drop and move to streaming? So we're talking about Carolina, New Orleans. So the Saints are my 4th DST for this week against Atlanta. And the Panthers are my 6th DST against Pittsburgh. Trubisky is probably going to start unless Pickett gets out of the concussion protocol. So that's something worth monitoring as well. I would still have the Saints over the Panthers, but that's how I would go, Lucius. I think you're streaming from now on. Ramondre manager here. Should I pivot to Pierre Strong and count on him missing this week? So no and yes. My no is that should I pivot to Pierre Strong? And I mentioned earlier that I think it's Kevin Harris who's going to get the majority of work if Damian Harris doesn't go. And that's how it went in the Arizona game. Kevin Harris, 51% of the snaps, 8 carries, 14 routes. Yes, it was only 26 total yards, but he was the one who was trusted. He did get in the end zone, 8.6 PPR fantasy points. Pierre Strong looked the part. He's much more athletic, much faster, much burstier, as we saw, 90 total yards, but only 26% of the snaps in Ramondre's absence, and Damian Harris may be back. So I'm not confident pivoting to Pierre Strong and like counting on him at this point there, Lucius. King Dirk, should I start Jerry Jeudy or Mike Evans? Let's pull it up. Let's pull up the wide receiver rankings and talk about some of the matchups here. Jerry Jeudy against Arizona. That's a pretty positive matchup. We see Arizona really struggling, but we also don't know. We do not know if Russell Wilson is going to be available, right? That's going to be the concern. the Denver Broncos have expressed a lot of hesitancy to say that he's going to pass through the concussion protocol. So let's look back on week 7. And I'm trying to remember if Jerry Jeudy was available during week 7. In week 7, Jerry Jeudy, interesting. Okay, so Brett Rippon was the quarterback week 7. Jerry Jeudy, 7 for 96, 11 targets. He finished as the wide receiver 19, 13 fantasy points. He didn't get the touchdown, but he was a solid wide receiver too. And if it's Brett Rippon, we know what we're going to get from Jerry Jeudy. We're going to get a back-end wide receiver too. And look, I missed on Jerry Jeudy last week. I said he was a back-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3. And I mean, most people had him that spot. Kudos to those who, moved him up or started him. But Jerry Jeudy, I was on the fence on it. At least I knew he was going to play over Jameson Williams, right? But I am starting Jerry Jeudy over Mike Evans for this week. Jeudy gets the Arizona Cardinals, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, as I mentioned, get the Cincinnati Bengals, whose secondary gives up the 5th fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver position on the season. Evans has fallen on the wrong side of variance over the last few games. He's dropped a bunch of touchdowns. Brady has missed him in the end zone. So it's been tough sledding for Mike Evans. So I would go Jerry Jeudy over Mike Evans. Where's ETN in your rankings? I figured Kamara has much better matchup than ETN. That's not really the case. It's pretty disastrous. It's pretty disastrous, the ETN versus Kamara deal, because ETN I have at right now, he's the running back 15 for me, his consensus 15 as well. Whereas Alvin Kamara is my running back 21. His consensus is running back 12. I don't have the confidence in Alvin Kamara. There's not a lot of reason to think that things are going to change for Alvin Kamara, right? We've seen him finish no better than the running back 19 each of the last 5 weeks. And then no better than running back 19, 6 of the last 7 weeks. And the last time he played Atlanta, he was the running back 47 with only 6 fantasy points. So no, I am not confident in Alvin Kamara. Give me ETN, at least in a game that, we have more confidence in the talent of ETN, and maybe Alvin Kamara has just fallen off. I mean, he was one of my players that I wrote up back in like January or February of this past year as sell him high. I said sell high on Aaron Jones. I said sell high on Alvin Kamara. I said sell high on Derrick Henry. And I said sell high on Dalvin Cook. And I mean, Derrick Henry has played well this year. Aaron Jones has given you some upside games, but all in all, the only real miss on that list has been Derrick Henry, right? So Dalvin Cook he's not been worth what you drafted him in the early second round. So I think Alvin Kamara is just not as good as he used to be. Sorry for the Kamara hate, but here we are. Should I drop Darius Slayton and pick up Elijah Moore? Ooh, this is a good question, Omar Rios. Because Darius Slayton right now gets Washington, and he is the consensus wide receiver 38. He's finished as the wide receiver 49 or worse in 2 of the last 3 games. Last time he played Washington, though, he went 6 for 90 on 8 targets. And I think that's about Elijah Moore, but I'm targeting an upside game with Elijah Moore. I'm okay dropping Darius Slayton if you want to start Elijah Moore. I'm okay with that. Pick one, DPJ, Burks, or Chark. If I knew that Burks was full go, fully healthy, I'm going with Burks. But if there are any hints that Burks is not ready to go, or if that he's had limited practices this week, or that Burks is going to be limited in snaps, it's DPJ. I think that's an easy pivot. Cadillac's asking thoughts on a trade, Stevenson and a Hollywood for JT, Pacheco, and Sutton. I would go with the JT, Pacheco, and Sutton side. Yeah. Sutton, I don't know what you're going to get from him, but Hollywood just lost his starting quarterback, and it's, Colt McCoy behind center. That Arizona offense is in a lot of trouble. Give me the JT Pacheco package for Stevenson and Hollywood. If I, get Sutton thrown in, that's fine. Other wide receivers, Amon-Ra, Garrett, Hopkins, and DJ Moore. Yeah, that's fine. Rate my quarterback: Herbert, Eckler, Jacobs, AJ Brown, Olave, Jerry Jeudy. I think you're in really good shape, King Dirk. You're going to be a real contender for the playoffs. I think a lot of teams are going to it's going to be tough for other teams to beat you there, King Dirk. All right, Lucius Varenis, 44. How do you think Ayuk is going to play without Debo being around and the quarterback switch? So, a couple things about this. We are expecting Debo to miss a few games. Last week, Brandon Ayuk, 2 for 57. Not good. But Ayuk had the touchdown save the day. What I liked about Ayuk in the Miami game was the 9 targets. Yes, he only went 5 for 46, only has 7 fantasy points, finishes the wide receiver 49. But now Ayuk gets the wide receivers to himself, and his wide receiver cornerback matchup, like you're playing Brandon Ayuk this week, regardless of who the quarterback is. Like if Josh Johnson is the quarterback, you're firing up Brandon Ayuk because his wide receiver cornerback matchup is 95% against Seattle. That's one of the highest on the week. So you're firing up Brandon Ayuk. I'm not too worried about the quarterback switch. And if anything, I would like Josh Johnson. We've seen a couple 300-yard passing games out of him over the last few years. Is Debo droppable? I mean, is he probably going to play again this year? Probably not. Am I going to drop him? I also don't want to be, if I can afford it, I don't want to drop him. I mean, we'll see. We'll see it because he's supposed to miss 3 weeks-ish. But maybe it's just 2. I wouldn't want someone else picking up Deebo Samuel because if someone else picks up Deebo Samuel, I'm going to be sad. Thomas Dodson, something random. Yahoo's dumb. As I learned not to pay attention to projections, they have Walker and Zeke projected basically the same. Yeah, Walker's in a lot of trouble this week. Yeah, I would start Zeke pretty comfortably over Kenneth Walker. I would be very surprised if Kenneth Walker plays ahead of Zeke this week. All right, a couple other quick ads. One is Kadarius Toney. I want y'all to go make sure you're picking up Kadarius Toney this week. And you're like, but wait, why, Bradley? And it's, because of Houston, it's a really good matchup. I know that Houston doesn't give up a lot of fantasy points to the wide receiver position, but we've seen the wide receiver 11 finish in week 10 against Jacksonville. And all Kadarius Toney needs is 4 receptions to get that done, right? And he gets sprinkled in with the rushing, right? Look, Kadarius Toney, 4 rushes on the season, 56 yards. 14 yards per carry. We'll take it, right? Kadarius Toney. So pick him up, extremely high upside wide receiver. We will see if he actually gets some run. Another very, very, very sneaky wide receiver in deep leagues to add is Olamide Zaccheaus. And you're like, who is Olamide Zaccheaus? Olamide Zaccheaus has 13 targets over the last 2 games. He's played 78% of snaps over the last 2 games. He's finished as the wide receiver 28 and wide receiver 80 during that span. And it's just a player that, is getting increased usage. And especially with Kyle Pitts not there, Olamide Zaccheaus may be getting an extra target or 2 in extremely deep leagues. Consider Olamide Zaccheaus. And you're not as deeper leagues, I want you to go after a really deep cut. And today on Fantasy Pros, they sent me a little message and they said, hey, who is your sleeper of the week? And I'm like, well, I talked about him last week on the GOAT District podcast. Well, this week I'm going to talk about him again. It's Isaiah Hodgins. Isaiah Hodgins, baby. He's had 6 targets each of the last 2 weeks. He's had touchdowns each of the last 2 weeks, 5 and 4 receptions. He's finished as the wide receiver 21 and 22 during that time. And this week he gets Washington again, where he went 5 for 44, had a touchdown, 15.4 fantasy points. If you are in a deeper league and Isaiah Hodgins is out there and you need a flex spot, he's played 81% or more of the snaps each of the last 2 weeks. He is a full-time player in this offense. Isaiah Hodgins, you've heard it here, okay? Another player that is a deep league consideration, Rashid Shaheed. And this is the last player I'll talk about tonight. Rashid Shaheed, an absolute speed demon, big play player, 6'1", 180. He is an undrafted free agent out of Webster State. He was a punt and kick return guru in college and took a lot of punts and kicks to the end zone. He set a lot of records for return yardage in college. And looking at his game logs, right, he is a big play waiting to happen. 1 reception for 53 receiving yards in week 7. He had 3 receptions for 38 yards in week 8. Okay. And then over the last 3 weeks, Rashid Shaheed, the reason why he needs to be on your radar is because he's played 74, 63, and 70% of snaps. He is getting to be more than just a halftime player. The Saints are rotating in Rashid Shaheed significantly into the rotation. Last game he played, week 13 against Tampa Bay, 4 for 75, 63 air yards, 4 targets. He ran 19 routes, finished as the wide receiver 36, 11.5 fantasy points in PPR. He is a deep play, big play waiting to happen. In your deep leagues, consider picking up Rashid Shaheed. King Dirk, is Ben Skowronek worth picking up? Okay, Ben Skowronek. Let me look at where I have him in the rankings here. Skowronek, the Notre Dame grad. I don't know if y'all can tell or if you know this, but the reason why I was in on Skowronek was because he and I both went to Notre Dame. So Golden Domers, we see eye to eye on this. But Skowronek right now, is he worth picking up? And you would think, yes. You would think coming off of the wide receiver 24 finish where he had 8 targets, 7 receptions for 89 yards, he would be a pickup. But it was against Las Vegas, and Las Vegas is an extremely plus wide receiver matchup. And this was tying a season high in targets for Skowronek. This was a career high in receiving yards. Here's the thing. Ben Skowronek per PFF this week has the lowest wide receiver cornerback advantage. Literal 0. There is no advantage per PFF. I don't know if I've ever seen this where PFF gives a 0% advantage. Like 0 to 100%. And the average is 50. Skowronek is at a 0. So no. You can find better options, like fire up your Jahan Dotsons or your Jameson Williams or your Elijah Moores or your Donovan Peoples-Jones over Ben Skowronek's. Okay, there you go, King Dirk. Before the podcast is over, you got to pick Zeke or Barkley. Just kidding. I understand. Oh, PPR. Oh, it's PPR. Well, why didn't you say that? Maybe I missed it. It was PPR. Let me pull up and see if my if Fantasy Pros has adjusted for PPR. So right now, yeah, it looks. I don't want to leave without it, without giving it to you. Let's look at games in full PPR. Yeah, I think you're going to have to start Zeke. Zeke has finished no worse than running back 15 since week 6. Oh, since week 5, I suppose. Week 5, he finished the running back 39 ever since running back 12, 9, 15, 9, and 11. So, yeah, let's go with Zeke over Barkley. There's your answer, Thomas. And that'll do it for tonight's podcast. Thank you so much, everybody. And be like Thomas. And if you are new to the podcast, make sure you're hitting that subscribe button. If you are returning, I appreciate all of you jumping into the comments. This is a lot of fun. I look forward to doing this every week. I do a lot of video content. So if you're new to the channel, what I'll do is I'll chop up all of these takes and put them into individual videos. It's too late for tonight, so probably tomorrow, but that's what you should expect. Is so don't freak out or like Stalder's overloading on videos. No, I post a ton of videos. They're just like 2 or 3 minutes long, and if you want to revisit any of them, check them out or share them with your friends or your buddies, or like, hey, like this guy, like make sure you're subscribing to his channel. Like, please do that. Like, it really, really helps. It means a lot to me if you share it out, and I know some of you have. And so I appreciate it. It means a lot to me and the community. And we've got a great community growing here. We've gone from 50 subscribers about 2.5, 3 months ago to now 500 subscribers, nearly 500 subscribers. I think we're at 481 right now. So thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. And Thomas gets a Hail Mary question. Is so Dobbins good PPR over Barkley? Let's go. Dobbins over Barkley. You heard it here. All right, everyone. Till next time, good luck in the fantasy football streets.
I embrace all this risk, I'm insane. Talking about that best bill, I'm the best rest till into the next world. Guess I got next still. Best bill, I'm the best rest till into the next world. Guess I got next still.